Before the internet, before satellite TV, and before photography allowed people to see images from far-off lands, and before technology and commerce began to homogenize the world into the global village that we know today, the planet had very distinct individual cultures, distinct because they'd largely developed independently of one another. 1,000 or so years ago, people living in Great Britain had no concept of how their culture differed from the culture in Japan, for example, at the other side of the world. The average person in Japan, in turn, had no concept of how their culture differed from that in India or South Africa. People had much smaller horizons then, and indeed most would have lived and died within quite a small radius of the place where they were born. Now, as these pockets of civilization developed independently across the world, it's interesting to note that for all of their cultural differences, there were some commonalities, some common themes that emerged between them. All of these cultures had some elements that were the same across the entire board, meaning that someone from Britain could have gone to Japan or India or Africa and seen some very recognizable things. I call these similarities the universals, because they are indeed universal to all mankind. And I think it's interesting if we look at these universals because they reveal some deep truths about who we are. For example, every culture independently decided that food was a good and necessary thing. Unsurprising, really. We all concluded that we need to eat to survive, and so every civilization developed its own food culture. Every food culture looked different, and each one would have eaten different things, but eating food is a universal instinct, of course. Music is a universal instinct. Every culture had this instinct to somehow create music. They each went about it in different ways. Some hollowed out wood and blew into it to make noise. Some used animal skins to make drums. Some realized that if you made strings, that could make a nice noise. But whatever it sounded like, the same basic instinct existed in all people to make music. If someone from Britain 1,000 years ago had gone across the world, he would have seen people making music and said, we do something similar. We do that. Play is a universal. Wherever you go in the world, people have an instinct to play. The games that developed in each culture were different, but that core instinct to play and to have fun existed everywhere. And of course, we see it most visibly in sports today. So universal are these instincts across all humanity that if you go to a different part of the world and you want to communicate with the locals but you don't speak their language, you can often bridge the divide with these things, with food, with music, with sport. These are things that we all understand wherever we go. And it kind of reminds me of that scene from Walter Mitty where they're in Nepal, I think it is, and they connect with the locals by playing football. Marriage is an interesting universal. Men and women in every culture have always instinctively paired up with one another and made some kind of solemn oath to be faithful. Britannica Encyclopedia says, some form of marriage has been found to exist in all societies, past and present. Its importance can be seen in elaborate and complex rituals surrounding it. Although these laws and rituals are varied and as numerous as human social and cultural organizations, some universals do apply. So wherever you go in the world, the rituals, the oaths, the ceremonies, the clothing may vary, but human beings have always had this basic instinct to pair up with someone of the opposite sex and to do so for life. This isn't something that needs to be taught. This is something which has been hardwired into us. C.S. Lewis wrote, "Those who are in love have a natural inclination to bind themselves by promises. Love songs all over the world are full of vows of eternal constancy." Of course, people have often taken a wrong turn with this marriage instinct. Some people have been bigamous or polygamous, marrying multiple people at once. Some people have married others of the same sex rather than the opposite sex. Some people have married animals. Some have even married themselves. But that people have gone wrong with the instinct isn't really the point. The point is that the instinct is there. I'm not sure if I should tell this story, but when I was a kid at nursery/kindergarten/play school, as we called it, I remember being given a cup of juice because I was thirsty. And although I was thirsty and I had the instinct to drink it, I suddenly found myself wondering if it was possible to drink through your ear. I'd only ever tried through my mouth before, but I was an inquisitive and questioning child even then. So I tipped the juice over the side of my head just to see what would happen. Maybe you could do it. I didn't know. Of course, I soaked myself in juice. I was covered in it, my head, all my clothes. The teacher was furious. So I'd gone wrong with the instinct, but the instinct to drink was still there. That's the point. Now, there's another universal instinct that I think is very informative and revealing, and it's really the point of this video, and it's the instinct to believe in God. Every civilization for all of history has independently come to the same conclusion that there's something more to this world than what we can see. Every culture has instinctively believed that there's a spiritual element to this life. And every human being seemingly hardwired with a desire to worship something. Now, as every culture tried to reach out and grasp for that spiritual realm, they tried to reach out for it. Many took a wrong turn with that instinct, and in the same way some people take a wrong turn with marriage and end up marrying people of the same sex or animals, people in different cultures would sometimes end up grasping at the wrong things, and they would end up worshipping idols made to look like people, birds, animals, or reptiles, as the Bible says. In the same way you get polygamists, some people would be polytheists, worshipping hundreds of gods instead of one. It's a wrong turn, but that's not the point. That they went wrong with the instinct isn't the point. The point is that the instinct is there. That's the revealing thing. We are hardwired to believe in a spiritual aspect to life, to worship something, and to believe that somehow we were meant to be eternal. In 2014, Boston University conducted studies on this and concluded that we are hardwired to believe we're immortal. The authors of the study said, researchers have long suspected that people develop ideas about the afterlife through cultural exposure, like television or movies, or through religious instruction. But perhaps these ideas of immortality actually emerge from our intuition. Paul Bloom was excited about this study, and he agreed, saying one persistent belief is that children learn these ideas through school or church. But do they? The team studied kids from various cultures, including some from the Amazon basin of Ecuador who had no influence from TV, movies, religious instruction, school, or church, and they concluded the study suggests that our bias towards immortality is a part of human intuition that emerges naturally early in life. Every human being naturally and instinctively believes that there's something more, which is why it's a universal. Every culture independently came to the same conclusion because it's hardwired into us to believe that this is true. Now, what's interesting about this is that whatever we are hardwired for, there tends to be something to meet that instinct. We have a universal instinct for food because, well, there is such a thing as food. We have a universal instinct for music because that exists as well. We have a universal instinct to play and have fun. We can do that. We have a universal instinct to get married. We can do that as well. And so it's very curious that we also find within ourselves, and indeed within all humanity, this universal instinct for God, for worship, for eternity. It suggests that those things exist as well. C.S. Lewis again famously said, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger, well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim, well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire, well, there is such a thing as sex. If I find within myself a desire which no experience in the world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. The fact that we are from birth instinctively and universally hardwired to believe in eternity, to believe in God, suggests that those things exist. Now, as Christians, we believe that while the world has kind of been groping around in the dark, trying to reach out for this God whom they instinctively believe in but don't know yet, and they've been taking wrong turns and grabbing onto the wrong thing, that God has actually come down to reveal himself to the world in the form of Jesus Christ. So they don't have to grope around in the dark any longer. He's actually come down to reveal himself in the form of Jesus Christ, the one true God, the creator of heaven and earth, the creator of you, the creator of me. Christians have then been given the Great Commission to go out into the world and to make some introductions, to tell everyone, look, you know that eternity that you instinctively already believe in, that God whom you instinctively already know is there, and you have this desire to worship? Well, we can show him to you, and his name is Jesus. Now, this is important because atheists will often say that Christians are responsible for brainwashing, especially children. Have you ever seen those memes where it's like a black and white kid and they're hanging out and they're having fun and they're friends, and then the meme says something like, no kid is born to hate, they get brainwashed by adults to hate one another? Well, atheists will often say something similar. They'll say, no kid is born believing in God. They have to be brainwashed into that by adults. We're all instinctively atheists at birth, and then Christians come along with their propaganda and start filling their kids' heads with all these nonsense. No, the reverse is actually true. Kids naturally believe in God. Kids naturally believe in eternity. Kids naturally and instinctively believe there's something more to life. And therefore it is you atheists who are actually brainwashing your kids with your atheist propaganda, knocking something out of them which they inherently already believe in. Belief in God is a universal. It is by far the majority position. Every culture, every civilization, up until very, very recently, independently reached this conclusion. Even to this day, theists are still a massive majority in the world. Now, many have gone wrong with it and they've grasped onto the wrong thing, but that's not the point. It proves that the instinct is there. And where there's a desire, there's always something to fulfill that desire. If there's a desire for God, that exists. God exists. We're not the brainwashers. Christians are not the brainwashers. It's the atheists who have the propaganda and are doing the brainwashing. When you tell your children that God isn't there, you're fighting against your own hardwiring, something that you know deep down is actually true. The Bible says, but God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. That's what atheists are doing. They're suppressing the truth. They know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky through everything God made. They can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. The universals are very revealing. We are hardwired to believe in God because God is there. We're hardwired to believe in eternity because eternity exists. God did this hardwiring within us so that we might instinctively know this and go looking for him. Now, you may have taken a wrong turn with this. You may have worshipped the wrong God. You may have tried to suppress this instinct altogether and worship none at all. But if you have taken a wrong turn with this instinct, in whatever way that may be, I can tell you now that the one that you're looking for has in fact come to us first. You can know him today. He's there. God is real. His name is Jesus Christ. I encourage you to reach out to him today, and I promise you, your life will never be the same again.